Karl Marx was a philosopher. He specifically philosophized about society and capitalism, as well as a new idea which had not necessarily been introduced popularly in the Western world, called communism. Throughout the many years to come, socialism and communism became a popular idea, especially during that time, under imperial ways of existence at the time, as well as capitalist ways of existence as well. And even until this day, capitalism still prevails as the economically dominant way of existence. In the United States, it is a capitalist society economically, and in many countries as well, aside from the U.S., our capitalist economy, Europe as well, and South Korea, for example, is another one, which was backed by the United States when the Korean War happened between the Japanese. So North Korea Korea was divided into North and South was backed by the United States, and till this day it is a prosperous country of capital and K-pop and incredible influence throughout the entire globe. So with the reach of drama and the reach of music, and diving into South Korea, you could see the capitalist prosperity of that nation. And Karl Marx was a strong critique against that very capitalism, because he believed and he saw that it did, at least if he saw it empirically, that he understood capitalism to be an exploitive way of life. And for those who are struggling economically, that is very true. That is a reality. That is a reality that is lived, not just in thought, but actually experienced. That is especially true for people in the U.S. who may not have a job, they may have a hard time finding work, and then they live in the lowest parts of society, and they struggle in their way of life, and that is understandable. And unless one is privileged, for example, or has an incredible career, specifically in the United States, and if I really aim it down to California, that's a very true reality. Unless you have a good job, then it is difficult to survive in the state of California, because California is an expensive area. And it also reminds me of the American dream that we once thought of as the American dream. It seems that people who expect you to be in the United States it seems that perhaps they expect one to have a prosperous existence, compared to if a person sees that from a third world country view, because everyone wants to go to the United States because it's the land of opportunity, it's the land of jobs and things like that. So everyone migrates there to find a job and things like that. But the reality is that even within the United States, in every single country, there is both rich and poor. And that is even the same in North Korea, which supposedly many people like to call it a communist country, which is not a communist country. It is a socialist country, which is ruled by a family dynasty, and some would even go as far as to call it a totalitarian state or an authoritarian state, but perhaps leaning more toward a totalitarian state. Yet there is still economy going on. There's still money in exchange of this, in exchange of that. There's still economic trade going on between the seller and the buyer. Such as if you want to purchase a text in North Korea, you have to pay okay, well, I can't get it for free, right? Because the entire point of communism is not to use, it is the abolition of currency as well. That's the entire point of communism too, is at least at the end of the, at the stages of communism, the abolition of currency is a goal that Marx had in mind. And instead of having to rely on money as currency, one would rely on natural resources of that specific land, for example, to have goods and things made, and it is all for the benefit of society, and society is working for each other without having the need of money and things of that sort. So imagine if bankers were able to see that, they would probably freak out and leave that country or that society where they want to implement such a thing, because they don't have a place in the entire in the entire society. Imagine that bankers would just go crazy. They say, no, we're getting out of here. We're going to go to the United States. We're going to go to Europe. We're going to have our own thing, if ever the society were not in U.S. or Europe. Now, Karl Marx talks about class consciousness. And class consciousness is the awakening, the realization stage that my place in society, in a capitalist society specifically, is that there are poor, medium, middle, average class or middle class, and rich as well, wealthy class. So being class conscious is you realize your state, your place in society, and you realize the social structures, the socioeconomic social structures that exist as a place in society. Now, the Philippines is a perfect example of this, because the Philippines is a economically disastrous and politically disastrous society, specifically economically, that is, because it's a third world country. Yeah, that's what they get for independence from the United States when they offered it. So you have to bloody face the consequence because of your desire of independence. Okay, no problem at all. Now look at you. You're a poor country. Poor Philippines. So the Philippines is a perfect example of this, where there are many poor individuals. There are a lot of poor people. And there are also middle class people. And there are also wealthy people. And the wealthy people get to enjoy everything, and of course they look down on people who are poor as well. A typical aristocratic attitude and mindset to those who have that kind of rude and mean mindset. And it's very, and what what Marx would say about that is that it's exploitive, it's oppressive, and that the aristocratic way of existence and that being rich should be abolished. It should be destroyed, because it's not for the benefit of the people. And the Philippines is a poor country. It is a poor country, so there are a lot of poor people everywhere. So whenever you talk to, for example, if you're a foreigner and you talk to someone in the Philippines and they know you're a foreigner, especially from the West, they're going to ask you for money. Everything is about bloody money. Do you see now the relation of the importance of currency in relation to existence in a disastrous socioeconomic society? Do you see that? The importance of money. Not only are cell phones important these days, that every single individual in this entire world, or at least most of the entire world, most of the known world, that is, of course, excluding the North Sentinel Island, of course, I don't know if they even know about anything else about smartphones or technology. They practically live in the Stone Age. Now in the Iron Age, that they got weapons and equipment from ships. Most of the known world not only has cell phones. Even in the poorest parts of the Philippines, as I've talked about, that the Philippines is a very poor country, you not only have cell phones in those provinces, but there are also, but every single person in the known world has money. So it tells you there are two most important things in this economical world, and it's cell phones and money. We need to communicate, and for whatever purpose, for family, for relationships, for business, especially for business, because if we tie in money and business, it has to do together as well. So we see that as an importance of society there. Now, the Philippines, as I said, is a perfect example of this. The people are poor. They want to be, I'm assuming they want to be freed from their poverty and things of that sort. So Karl Marx gives a solid structure as to how to alleviate oneself from exploitation, in which the Philippines is known to be an exploitive country when it comes to work. So Karl Marx would, if Karl Marx would have any country to analyze these days and to solve its solution, solve the problem, solve the issue of a country, it would definitely be the Philippines. One of the places would definitely be the Philippines, because it is a perfect example of what Karl Marx would call capital. Of literally a perfect example of what Karl Marx would call capital. It's literally like, perhaps I could relate this to the industrial period during Karl Marx's time, when people were working in factories, or kids working in factories, where literally children were working in factories, or people working who get only surplus of who receive their surplus value, which wouldn't even be enough for them to survive, for example, which is one strong critique against capitalism, because capitalism, supposedly, the whole purpose of you to work is to live. And if you work just for the benefit of the bourgeoisie, or the benefit of the person giving you surplus value, then there's no bloody point of working then. I'm just serving some kind of a dictator or an emperor, for example, without having any kind of thing in return that would sustain or suffice for my existence, and especially not for my only my existence, but the existence of my family, my wife, my kids, for example, your girlfriend, or whoever else that you live with, or you're trying to provide for. The people don't care about you. They only care about what you can do for them, and also they'll only give you just a little amount of money. And that's especially true in California, within the United States, where why is it that when I work at McDonald's, I can't live a proper life in California? Because the whole entire purpose of work is to survive, is to have a sufficed existence. But there's an issue here now. When I work in a capitalist society, I don't get that same thing. Why is it that when you're a doctor in the state of California, that I get better pay than a worker who works at McDonald's? The entire purpose of work is to sustain my existence. That is the same thing in the Philippines. Why is it when a doctor in the Philippines works why is it when a doctor works in the Philippines, he gets paid more than a nurse would? Or he would get more paid than a theater worker would, or a Jollibee worker would. For example, Jollibee is one of the fast food chains. They're kind of like McDonald's, but 1,000 times better. So why is it that a Jollibee worker gets paid less than a doctor in the Philippines? Isn't the entire point of work, in and of itself, the purity of work, is to suffice one's existence? Yet that has become a more exploitive way of production, of action. And it's not fair. This is exactly what Karl Marx would say. It is not fair for that to happen, because the entire point of living, of working, is to exist. How can I exist if I don't have work? And if I work and I can't exist because of work, then what's the whole point of this entire hierarchy and system? The entire system is broken, for example. he would say. And we would see that as the system being broken. Relating back to the United States, what has ever happened to the American dream? Why is it that, okay, I'm from a poor country, for example, I'm from the Philippines, or I'm from China, or I'm from India, or I'm from this poor country or that poor country, okay, and I want to go to the United States, and I end up working at McDonald's, and then I realize, why is it that I can't find a house? I can't afford a house in California when I work at McDonald's. Just a simple, small house, literally just for a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom house, it's already $500,000 just to purchase. It's bloody ludicrous. Now, perhaps if I go outside of California, there are better opportunities and things like that. But what about the pay? The pay. Now I have to work in California and then go back to the state and things that sort in order for me to survive. But I want to stay in this state, and the entire system of capitalism collapses on itself. This is exactly what Karl Marx was talking about as well, is that it is a system that is exploitive, and it is a system that must be abolished, and societally this opiate of capitalism must no longer exist because of its exploitive nature. And you see that. You see that not only within the Philippines, but also within the United States as well. As I said, the Philippines is a perfect example of exploitation of workers. So you work in the Philippines and then they exploit you for, like I said, you receive what is called surplus value. You're a worker, you work in the Philippines, you receive what's called surplus value. And then it's not enough for you to even survive, for example. Seriously, it's probably enough for you to just buy food, enough for you to buy this or that. But it's difficult for you to find a decent job within a economically undesirable or economically disastrous country and survive properly. It's difficult for you to do that, to find a decent position. And let me tell you this, it's no reason. Let me tell you this. It's one reason why a lot of people in the Philippine Islands decide to become prostitutes, whether they're online or whether they're going to be with politicians, because the entire socioeconomic structure is broken. Because it's a poor country. Okay, you wanted your independence. Okay, then suffer. Not only will your pride end up having you to struggle, but now the rest of the people have to suffer because of your choice of independence. So you just choose to be independent from the United States, which could actually help you and benefit you and prevent such a thing. But then again, within the United States, there are prostitutes everywhere anyway. It wouldn't make a difference because it's a capitalist society. In the streets of Los Angeles, you see these women in short clothes, and the same in San Francisco, the same in Las Vegas. They all have all these things. If everyone was economically well off because of work, because of labor, there would be no means to sell their own body. Imagine that. It just tells you how desperate they are for money. And that is exactly what it is to live under a capitalist society. You live off of surplus value, the surplus value of workers, and which may not suffice for your existence. You can't even afford to you can only afford to buy your food, and you only could afford this, but you can't. Well, what about the rest of the things? Water bill, heater bill, many other bills, and then you work at McDonald's, and you're trying to live, and the entire point of work is to have a sufficed existence. It's bloody difficult to do that. So now, because we see this exploitation, now Karl Marx would analyze this exploitation, see this exploitation. He would see that there's poor, there's medium class, there is average class, and there's rich class. And also Che Guevara, the Argentinian Marxist revolutionary who helped assist the Cuban Revolution, saw this as well. This was one of his reasons why he decided to become a socialist. He was a doctor, by the way, a medical doctor, Che Guevara, but he decided to be a socialist because he saw the capitalist structure, the capitalist hierarchy of society. He saw the capitalist structure, the capitalist hierarchy of society. He saw there's poor, there's average class, and there's also rich class. So he saw this as a kind of imbalance of society, and it is an imbalance of society. Karl Marx would agree with that. Marx would say that this is the result of capitalism. This is the result of capitalism, that we have now poor, rich, and average class. If there's no capitalism, there wouldn't even be such concepts of poor or existences of poor and rich or medium class. There would just only be, everyone would be equal, just human beings working to suffice their existence. That's the only way that one would communicate if ever one were to live in a communist society. That is the communist dream. That is the Marxist dream, is a utopia of happiness and prosperity, and everyone is working for each other, and there's no need for exploitation. It sounds almost like heaven, for example, for religious people. If you're a religious individual and you say heaven, it's just, there's no pain, no suffering, no inequality, no things else. So everyone is it sounds just like that. It's like heaven on earth, basically. And so now that we have seen that there is both poor, average class, and rich class, now we are class conscious. Now being class conscious is the realization of that, look, there's poor, there's medium, and there's also rich. But not only that, but also your place within society as well. That even if you are a rich person, you can become class conscious. Even if you are the average person, average class, you can become class conscious. If you are in the poor class, you can become class conscious as well. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. Class consciousness is the awakening or the realization of your place within society socioeconomically. And this is the very beginning to the path of a Marxist revolution to overthrow capitalism. And it is the very first. It is one of the foundations, or at least one of the very beginnings of before one would implement revolution. So it's more, someone could understand this as a spiritual awakening, but this is a socioeconomic awakening. And Karl Marx wrote his most written work called Capital, and it comes in 3 volumes. And his most notable work, along with his comrade or partner or brother, you could say, if you are a communist, for example. Personally, I don't adhere to any kind of political philosophy, but I do like to read of course I like to read. I'm a lecturer. Obviously, I read every single type of philosophical theory about whatever. So, but the Communist Manifesto is one written by Karl Marx along with his comrade or partner, Friedrich Engels. And that is his most notable work, most popular work, which is among communists today. Until this day, communists have not died off. It seems that communists have died off to this day, and it wasn't such a big thing. But it is actually more big than ever. And the reason why is because, like I said, there is an exploitive system that is going on, especially within the Philippines. It is a reality. Everyone is living off of surplus value. Not everyone can live a sufficed existence. But one can't necessarily have a sufficed existence in the Philippines if you do not have a decent position. And Karl Marx would want the people of the Philippines to be class conscious, and after being class conscious, they realized their place in society, and the rest of the chaos, socioeconomic chaos, and brokenness of the socioeconomic way of life in the Philippines. He would see all of those individuals and say, hey, it is time that we change this place, because this is a disastrous place socioeconomically. The way of life here is horrendous, to the point that people within their own island want to leave and go where? To the West, because it provides a better way of existence and a better way of life. When actually what's hilarious is this: you still have to have a good job in the United States if you want to live prosperously. You still need to have a good job if you want to live prosperously within the United States as well. But that's why a lot of people within the Philippines, they study nursing, and then they end up going to places such as the Middle East, then to places where there's economic wealth. Dubai, KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Dubai, United States, Canada. Those places within the Middle East and the West are economically well off. Yet, of course, that's not to deny that there's still a big portion within the United States which suffer socioeconomically too. But for the majority, perhaps, the people who have decent positions, only if you have decent positions, or if you work two different jobs or 3 different jobs, which won't even suffice, by the way, too, in California, then, unless they're decent positions, then again, it's a whole mix, as you see, that's going on here. There's a whole vast array of different things mixing together. So Karl Marx would say to the people of the Philippines, Filipino people, for example, he would say this. He would say, look, it's time to get up. It's time to take up. It's time to, now that I have shown you, now you know there is, hey, look, there is now poor, medium, and median or middle and rich class. And you see, this is an example of the brokenness socioeconomically, which is exactly what, like I said, Che Guevara saw this and saw this as the detrimentation of capitalism. And so he decided to stop. And he was a medical doctor. Like I said, Che Guevara was a medical doctor. So Karl Marx would say this exact thing: hey, look, poor, median or middle class, and rich class, you see, this is a perfect example of the brokenness in your socioeconomic system of the Philippines. Now it is time for the proletarian. It is time for the people, the workers. Okay, these workers who, especially the workers who have been exploited by their surplus value, or who have been exploited in any way by the person who, from the bourgeoisie. And now it is time to come together as a people. The proletarian must come together. The workers of the world, or the workers of the society, must come together and must overthrow the bourgeoisie, the person who appropriates surplus value from the laborer or the proletariat. And it is time for the proletariat to fight against the bourgeoisie because of their exploitive nature toward the laborer or proletariat in society. Now, it is only by the people, Karl Marx would say this. He would say it is only by the people that we can overthrow this way of oppression, this way of exploitation. And the only way to do this is by means of revolution. And that would not only eventually lead toward a smaller community being a communist society, or a socialist society eventually leading to a communist society, but then it would take on a bigger scale. For example, it would take on a bigger scale like that within the Russian Revolution as well. The Russian Revolution is a perfect example of that. And the Cuban Revolution is a perfect example of that. And there are many revolutions to consider, but the perfect one is the Russian Revolution, as well as the Cuban Revolution, how they freed themselves from a ideology that does not satisfy with a communist, that's not coherent with Marxist thought. And so class consciousness, the entire point of, so you're class conscious, and you're class conscious, and now after you're class conscious, there is a solution to be solved within this issue of socioeconomic exploitation. That solution to solve that exploitation is revolution, is Marxist revolution, which would eventually lead the people who are suffering socioeconomically to eventually liberating themselves from capitalism. And that is the entire that is the entire process of a Marxist established state, for example. And Lenin also talked a lot about Karl Marx. Vladimir Lenin was a Marxist as well. And it's incredible how there are so many historical examples of revolution and things of that sort, because revolution is the motion that brings about results. Without revolution, if you decide to, you know what I find very interesting is that in regard to revolution is that people who attempt Gandhian strategy of revolution, non-violence, ahimsa way of revolution, they don't get so far. They don't get very far. The only time they got very far was Martin Luther King, the boycott, or the Alabama thing, or whatever occurrence that happened during the civil rights movement. That happened successfully. Okay, so it's a smaller goal. When it comes to India under British rule, okay, Gandhi was alive at the time, and he implemented the strategy of ahimsa, and the majority of Indian people decided to non-violently resist the British, and they ended up being successful. But most of the time these days, try to do that with Tibet, try to do that with Xinjiang, try to do that with Palestine. It is bloody impossible to do it with those countries who are a lot larger and who have bigger goals in mind. So Marx saw this. He saw that physical revolution by means of taking up arms is necessary in order to eliminate the old broken system of capitalism. He saw this. I'm sure he thought of nonviolence and said, hey, no, this may not work. There's a possibility that this may not work. It is a good solution, he would probably say, but it may not work, he would probably say. So he decides to say that, look, a revolution must happen. Seize the means of the means of production must be seized. It's clear. Seize the means of production and establish a proletarian state. Establish a state by the people, ruled by the people, and things of that sort. That's what he would say. I'm sure he looked at various ways of revolution and different ways to implement revolution, but the most soluble way of revolution is by means of physical motion, by taking up arms against the bourgeoisie. The proletarian, the workers, take up arms against the bourgeoisie, which would then eliminate the capitalist way of production, capitalist way of society, capitalist way of existence. It is very important by means of revolution. By what means? Non-violence or by taking up arms. Clearly, taking up arms has a lot more effect than that which one does not take up arms at all. And I see all of these people within the it's always Western countries that have protests, and I think majority of the countries nowadays and throughout the entire world have protests of, oh yeah, we should just do a free Palestine. Is like this. Look, it's not going to do anything. When you say free Palestine, okay, what is that going to do? Okay, you have influence, you have media attention, you just have attention and influence. There's no change that's going on. You want to free Palestine, then take up arms. Karl Marx would say, take up arms and do something about it instead of whining and yelling out free Palestine with signs in your hands. That's not going to do anything. Solve the bloody problem by taking up arms and doing something about it. That's exactly what Karl Marx would say. Now, class consciousness may not only extend out to capitalism, but it can also extend out to colonialism as well. So, Karl Marx was a big anti-colonial guy. And a perfect example of anti-colonialism would be Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam under French colonial rule. And Ho Chi Minh was a Marxist-Leninist as well. And Ho Chi Minh was a Vietnamese revolutionary. He was the one who gathered the revolutionaries. He's the one that gathered the people of Vietnam, made them revolutionaries to overthrow French colonial rule. And as I'm gathering my notes here, I'd like to talk about that as well, because it's very important to note this as well as an example of class consciousness. Okay, class consciousness. Class consciousness. This little thing that we're talking about here. Class consciousness. So, Uncle Ho. A lot of Vietnamese would call him Uncle Ho. And the reason why they call him Uncle Ho is because he was an older guy, and he had a beard, so he pretty much had the appearance of an uncle. So, and he wrote this incredible paper on Lenin and Leninism, and this is called, and I'm going to read this to you. It's called "The Path Which Led Me to Leninism." Okay, I have to speak slower because for some reason my tongue can't pronounce it in a faster motion. For some reason, there are just certain words, or perhaps it's just a certain time where I'm speaking and then it ends up having to. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to read this to you. This is Uncle Ho Chi Minh when he talked about this. The path which led me to Leninism. Oh, I read that fast right there. Okay, this was first published in the Soviet Review Problems of the East on the occasion of the 90th anniversary of Vladimir Lenin's birthday, April 1960. And this, of course, from the Selected Works of Ho Chi Minh, Volume 4. And this is the path which led me to Leninism. So, Uncle Ho, or we'll just say Ho Chi Minh, of course. If you're a communist, probably say Uncle Ho. Ho Chi Minh says this: after World War I, I made my living in Paris. Now as a retoucher at a photographers. Now as painter of Chinese antiquities, made in France. I would I would distribute leaflets denouncing the crimes committed by the French colonialists in Vietnam. At that time, I supported the October Revolution, only instinctively, not yet grasping all its historic importance. I loved and admired Lenin because he was a great patriot who liberated his compatriots. Until then, I had read none of his books. The reason for my joining the French Socialist Party was that these ladies and gentlemen, quote unquote, as I called my comrades at that moment, has shown their sympathy towards me, towards the struggle of the oppressed peoples. But I understood neither what was a party, a trade union, nor what was socialism or communism. Heated discussions were then taking place in the branches of the Socialist Party about the question whether the Socialist Party should remain in the Second International, should a Second and a Half International be founded, or should the Socialist Party join Lenin's Third International? I find it kind of hilarious how they say Second and a Half International. Why not just transition to the Third International, please? It's a lot more smooth and a lot less wordy as well. A lot less of a headache for people. I attended the meetings regularly, twice or thrice a week, and attentively listened to the discussion. First, I could not understand thoroughly why were the discussions so heated. Either the second and a half, or Third International, the revolution could be waged. What was the use of arguing then? As for the First International, what had become of it? What I wanted most to know, and this precisely was not debated in the meetings, was which international sides with the peoples of colonial countries. So this is an example here of Ho Chi Minh's in relation to French colonialism being the dominant role in Vietnam at the time. I raised this question, the most important in my opinion, in a meeting. Some comrades answered, it is the Third, not the Second International, and a comrade gave me Lenin's thesis on the national and colonial questions, published by Il Humanité, to read. There were political terms difficult to understand in this thesis, but by dint of reading it again and again, finally I could grasp the main part of it. What emotion, enthusiasm, clear-sightedness, and confidence it instilled into me. I was overjoyed to tears. Though sitting alone in my room, I shouted out aloud as if addressing large crowds, "Dear martyrs, compatriots, this is what we need. This is the path to our liberation." After then, I had entire confidence in Lenin, in the Third International. Formerly, during the meetings of the party branch, I only listened to the discussion. I had a vague belief that all were logical and could not differentiate as to who were right and who were wrong. But from then on, I also plunged into the debates and discussed with fervor. Though I was still lacking French words to express all my thoughts, I smashed the allegations attacking Lenin and the Third International with no less vigor. My only argument was, if you do not condemn colonialism, if you do not side with the colonial people, what kind of revolution are you waging? Not only did I take part in the meetings of my own party branch, but I also went to other party branches to lay down, quote-unquote, my position. Now I must tell again that comrades Marceau, Cachin, Villant, Coteria, Monmassol, and many others helped me to broaden my knowledge. Finally, at the Tour Congress, I voted with them for our joining the Third International. At first, patriotism, not yet communism, led me to have confidence in Lenin, in the Third International. Step by step, along the struggle, by studying Marxism-Leninism, parallel with participation in practical activities, I gradually came upon the fact that only socialism and communism can liberate the oppressed nations and the working people throughout the world from slavery. There is a legend in our country, as well as in China, on the miraculous quote-unquote Book of the Wise. When facing great difficulties, one opens it and finds a way out. Leninism is not only a miraculous quote-unquote Book of the Wise, a compass for us Vietnamese revolutionaries and people, it is also the radiant sun illuminating our path to final victory, to socialism and communism. That's one of Ho Chi Minh's incredible papers that he wrote, and it until today it's still gets me thrilled, it gets me going, it gets me worked up, it gets me excited, it gets me fired, especially if, for example, and I'm not, and I don't consider, and I don't align myself with communism at all. But for people who do align themselves with the communist ideology, imagine how they would feel when they read this. They would say, yes, 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 this is the path to yes, just yes, this is it, this is the yes. They would be, yes, workers of the world unite, and working men of the world unite. Karl Marx would read that. He would say, oh yes, good job, Ho Chi Minh. I'm very proud of you. Free yourself from colonial aggression. Not only capitalism, but colonial aggression as well. So, Karl Marx is a person who is of anti-colonialism as well, and in Karl Marx's Capital Volume 1, we see that in chapter 31, which is Genesis of the Industrial Capitalist, the beginning of the Industrial Capitalist, he says something that is very noteworthy here. He says this. He says, the discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signalized the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief mementa of primitive accumulation. On their heels treads the commercial war of the European nations, with the globe for a theater. It begins with the revolt of the Netherlands from Spain, assumes giant dimensions in England's anti-Jacobin war, and is still going on in the opium wars against China. N.C. Of the Christian colonial system, W. Howitt, a man who makes a specialty of Christianity, says, the barbarities and desperate outrages of the so-called Christian race throughout every region of the world and upon every people they have been able to subdue are not to be paralleled by those of any other race, however fierce, however untaught, and however reckless of mercy and of shame in any age of the earth. The history of the colonial administration of Holland, and Holland was the head capitalist nation of the 17th century, which is quoted here by Thomas Stamford Raffles, late Lieutenant Governor of that island, The History of Java, London, 1817. The history of the colonial administration of Holland, and Holland was the head capitalistic nation of the 17th century, is one of the most extraordinary relations of treachery, bribery, massacre, and meanness. So, we see that colonialism is quite the opiate, Karl Marx would say. Colonialism is an opiate as well. It is a disease, and it is an opiate that must be abolished as well as capitalism. Any form of oppression, whether it is by means of capital or by means of colonialism, it must be done away with. And the only way to do that is to what? Take up arms. It is your class conscious. After your class conscious and realize your place in socioeconomic society, you take up, the workers, the proletarian, take up arms against the bourgeoisie and overthrow the bourgeoisie. Seize the means of production. Overthrow the bourgeoisie. The proletarian, the workers of the world must do everything they can to free themselves from capitalism, as well as free themselves from colonialism too. And eventually, when it comes to colonialism, freeing oneself from colonialism, then transitioning that freedom from colonialism to socialism and communism, which was exactly why why in Vietnam the United States went to war with Vietnam, because they were so bloody scared that Vietnam was going to turn out to be a communist society after they have liberated themselves from the French. And what's hilarious too is that the U.S. helped Vietnam. They're supposedly helping Vietnam free themselves from Japanese aggressors as well. But the U.S. was so scared that they ended up killing a bunch of Vietnamese people, and they started a war with Vietnamese people because they were scared of the spread of communism. But that didn't stop them. The Americans lost in Vietnam. The United States lost in Vietnam, because it is bloody hilarious too, because the president at that time knew that war was not going to be successful, but he just sent people to die in Vietnam anyway, because they were so scared. Because the United States was so scared of communism being spread across Vietnam and spread throughout Vietnam. Because at that time, especially during that time, I believe too, that they were fighting against communism at the time, fighting against the Soviet Union. So that's the transition from traditional Marxist transition to, well, from a capitalist societal transition, and as well as a colonial societal transition. The proletarian gathers arms for themselves and overthrow the bourgeoisie, or the proletarian gathers arms for themselves and overthrows the imperialist aggressor. And that is exactly what Karl Marx would say to the proletarian, to the proletariat, is, look, just, you've realized your place in socioeconomic society. Now it is time to take up arms and throw yourself again and revolutionize and overthrow yourself and overthrow the bourgeoisie by your own strength and by arms. And the same comes with the colonialists as well. You take up arms and you fight against the colonialist aggressors. And that way you will liberate yourself and free yourselves. So, and then when it comes to colonialism, after one society who is an oppressed society, a colonial society, frees themselves from colonialism, now can begin the transition of socialism and then eventually communism, which is exactly what the United States feared during the Vietnam War. And this is exactly what, if we go back to Ho Chi Minh, when he's in his writing The Path Which Led Me to Leninism, he says this his last sentence was this. He said this: Leninism is not only a miraculous book of the wise, a compass for us Vietnamese revolutionaries and people, it is also the radiant sun illuminating our path to final victory, which is what? To socialism and communism. So, Ho Chi Minh was, of course, anti-colonial, anti-aggressor, and things of that sort, which is, he used Leninism and Marxist-Leninist thought, Marxist-Leninist revolution, to overthrow colonialism. But after the overthrow of colonialism, the transition would be from what? From socialism to communism, because you're still class conscious during this whole entire time. You are class conscious during this entire time. You're class conscious. You know your place in socioeconomic society, whether it is under a capitalist aggression or a capitalist way of exploitative aggression or colonial aggression. Either way, same thing. They're both aggressors, except one is more economic and the other is even more than just economic. It's societal and economic in every single aspect of your life. And knowing your place in society and eventually overthrowing that way of life, then transitioning from socialism to communism. So, the final victory of the end of class consciousness is the solution to the problem. And the solution to the problem, Karl Marx would say, is socialism and communism. That is the solution after freeing oneself from the capitalist aggression, as well as colonial aggression. Is the final victory is socialism, and then the very end, the successful end, the entire cake that is now built, that has now been finished, the end is what? Communism.